ನೀನ್ ಇದ್ದಾಗಲೇ ಕಲಿತಂದ್ರೆ ಮಕ್ಕ ಯಾರಾದ್ರೂ ಇದ್ದಾಗ ಇದನ್ ಮಾಡ್ರಿ. ಇದು ಎಲ್ದತ ಅಂತಂದ್ರೆ ಇದು ಬಾಯಿ ಮೇಲೆ ಹಿಡ್ತಾ ಇಲ್ಲ.
अमिता मैम, आप अगर एक बार अपना वीडियो और ऑडियो ऑन करके चेक कर लेती।
अमिता, आप प्लीज अपना ऑडियो वीडियो ऑन कर लीजिए ताकि हम आपको देख पाए.
Anjana, am I audible?
Right, you are audible and now we can see you.
Okay. So I don't need
morning.
earphone. The headphone is not needed.
No, it's not required. Good morning and welcome to the 6-day online UGC Stride lecture series. Amita?
Thank you.
Keep your audio and video on for the entire hours now.
Okay.
We'll require that at least it is on from your end continuously. It's great to have you here.
Same here.
How are
Thank
you
you.
doing?
Yeah, fine.
So the meeting is being recorded and it's live streamed on YouTube. As of now, we have started. And Shantini, we can start in 2-3 minutes.
We can start. Okay.
Start in next 3 minutes.
Okay.
So we have participants from other regions also, from like beyond the Hindi belt also.
Right. We have from
Yes, we have from the South India.
Okay.
We have from Northeast also, a few of them from Meghalaya who are working, not exactly to say, but they are not exactly the tribes, but they are people who are working on the Northeastern tribes. So there are a few people from the northeastern side and the southern side of India also, together with the northern India, and majority are from Jharkhand and Chhattisgarh and Odisha and this tribal belt. But we have around about 30 to 35 participants from different parts of South India and Northeast also.
Okay.
So would you be speaking bilingually or English or Hindi? What is your medium?
I choose to speak in English because since yesterday I came to know that there are many scholars and participants who are joining from Kerala and Karnataka also. So I'll be speaking in English, and I don't know if I do it bilingual, then it will take lots of time. So
okay, do it, but whenever you feel like that you need to explain something in Hindi, you may do it. If you feel like that, only if you feel like that.
Or what we can do is that during the question answer session, if there are any doubts from the side of the participants, then I can clarify. I can do that.
That would be wonderful. That would be simply wonderful. Now we can start. Shantini.
Good morning, everyone. After 2 days of enriching knowledge sharing, we are here starting the 3rd day of the 6-day online guest lecture series sponsored by UGC Stride Component 1. Dr. Anjana Singh, Principal Investigator, UGC Stride Component 1, Head History of Department, Nirmala College, Ranchi, and I, Dr. Shantini Banerjee, Assistant Professor and Co-Investigator, UGC Stride Component 1, Amita University, Jharkhand, welcome you all to the 3rd day of the 6-day National Guest Lecture Series sponsored by UGC Stride Component 1 and organized in collaboration with Nirmala College, Ranchi and Amita University, Jharkhand. In the first two sessions, we have heard about the theory of ecofeminism, the misgiven notions related to the term ecofeminism, how it is related to deep ecology. And in yesterday's session, we had heard about the ecofeminist perspective of looking at tribal women and how in the Adivasi folk songs we find this ecofeminist perspective. Today, I have the opportunity to introduce to you our esteemed speaker, Professor Amita Kumari. She is teaching as an assistant professor in the Department of History, Sidhu Kanu Murmu University, Dumka, Jharkhand, since 1st April 2008. And she is currently working as the head of the Department of History. She has completed her MPhil from JNU. She is a UGC NET and JRF in 2005. Her research interests include gender studies, Adivasi history, refugee and migration studies. She has a number of publications in various national and international journals, along with illustrious book chapters. She has been the principal investigator of a research project entitled Encountering Bhikkhus, Evolution of a Syncretic Culture Among the Santals, funded by the Sidhu Kanu Murmu University, Dumka. She has also been the principal investigator of a research project in the year 2018 titled Gendering the Study of Santals, Portraying Construction and Agency of Santal Women, funded by Indian Association of Women's Studies, Pune. She has presented around 3 to 5 papers as a resource person in various conferences, seminars, and webinars, including the Indian Association of Women's Studies, the Eastern Regional Conference in 20th November 2018. She was a special panelist on Jharkhand in the 16th National Conference on Women's Studies held in National Law University, New Delhi, and also a resource person in the 7 days international online lecture series and workshop entitled Revisiting the History of India and Beyond, which was organized by the Department of History, Shripat Singh College in collaboration with Jangipur College, Murshidabad. We welcome you, ma'am, and over to you now. Today, she will be speaking on the topic towards an ecofeminist understanding of Santals. Welcome, ma'am. Over to you.
Thank you. I'm grateful to Nirmala College, Ranchi, and Amita University, Jharkhand for providing me with this platform to share my research on Santals. I'm still a research scholar undergoing my PhD. So it's a privilege to be here on this platform. As you already know, that the topic of my presentation today is towards an ecofeminist understanding of Santals. So this study, this presentation of mine today, it would try to look at Santals through an ecofeminist lens. We all know who the Santals are. The Santals are an Adivasi community who reside predominantly in the Santal Pargana region of Jharkhand. So what I would be doing basically today is I'll be applying the conceptual frameworks offered by ecofeminism, and I'll apply it to my study in order to understand the material existence of Santal women, their experiential life, their material and experiential life of Santal women. This is what basically I'm going to do in my presentation. I've divided my presentation into 3 parts. The first part is a brief theoretical discussion on ecofeminism, where I would be outlining those conceptual tools that I borrow from ecofeminist philosophy and I apply to my study. This would be the first part. It would be a very brief part in that sense. The second part, this would be an exposition of the gradual inroads of capitalist-induced development in the region of Santal Parganas and how it has led to environmental degradation in the region, the loss of livelihood, and overall how it has impacted the lives of Adivasi here Santal women. And the third part here, I would first try to locate the Santal women in the traditional patriarchy of Santal society. And then I would go on to unravel the ways in which Santal women who are standing at the crossroads of both traditional patriarchy and the new forms that the patriarchy has taken due to the environmental degradation and the consequent loss of livelihood and dislocation. So this is what I do in the third part of my paper. So moving on to the first part, we all know what ecofeminism is. The first lecture by Professor Yahya Ibrahim, I attended that lecture. It was quite a comprehensive one dealing with the theoretical aspect of ecofeminism. We know that ecofeminism is a theory that tries to integrate feminism with environmentalism. It establishes associations between women and nature. I would like to quote Greta Gard. I believe that she kind of encapsulates what ecofeminism is when she draws her insight into ecofeminism. I quote her. Quote, drawing on the insights of ecology, feminism, and socialism, ecofeminism's basic premise is that the ideology which authorizes oppressions such as those based on race, class, gender, sexuality, physical abilities, and species is the same ideology which sanctions the oppression of nature. Ecofeminism calls for an end to all oppressions, arguing that no attempt to liberate women will be successful without an equal attempt to liberate nature. So ecofeminism, to put it more simply, is a theory that emphatically claims that environmentalism is a feminist issue, and feminism can never be complete without taking into account environmental concerns. This is what ecofeminism is in its broader sense. But ecofeminism as a philosophy has also its share of criticisms and denouncements. It is mostly criticized for being incoherent. There are many schools of philosophy within ecofeminism, schools of thought within ecofeminism, and due to these variants within ecofeminism, it has been criticized for being mutually contradictory. I quote Janet Bell, it's a short quote from her book. She says, ecofeminism, far from being healthily diverse, is so blatantly self-contradictory as to be incoherent. Then ecofeminism is also harshly criticized for being gender essentialist, for being blind to issues of race, ethnicity, for being blind to issues of class. Then ecofeminism has been criticized for its overemphasis on the special relationship between women and nature. Then it has been critiqued for its rejection of science, enlightenment, and reason. So these are very many positions which have been taken against ecofeminism, and this has led to a sort of distancing from ecofeminism by many feminists and many scholars who earlier had sympathies or leanings for ecofeminism, and that has led to the coining of many new terms instead of ecofeminism. I'll not go into detail into those terms. I just want to argue that amidst these harsh criticisms and critiques and denouncements of ecofeminism, what makes ecofeminism relevant is its constant endeavor to introspect, to revise its existing perspectives, and to incorporate and integrate newer approaches. And that makes ecofeminism a very alive and growing body of philosophy. And I, as a researcher on Santals, I also borrow few conceptual frameworks from ecofeminism. And this is what I'll do in next few minutes. I'll outline those few analytical paradigms that I borrow from ecofeminism. The first theoretical premise of ecofeminism that provides a broad framework to my study, to my presentation today, is the ecofeminist idea that there is a congruence between in the ways women and nature, both women and nature, are treated by human society. This idea, it establishes patriarchy as the prime agency that that sustains and that intensifies that control and oppression of women and nature. And it is this idea that establishes the male or the man as the prime beneficiary of this control of women and nature. So this particular premise that runs through almost all different schools of ecofeminism, this premise, this broad framework, has also provided a context, has also provided a perspective to my study today. This is one thing that I borrow from ecofeminism. The second paradigm that I borrow from this philosophy is capitalist patriarchy. To further emphasize the deep linkages between patriarchy and capitalism, or patriarchy and environmental degradation, what the ecofeminists have done, they have prefixed the word patriarchy with capitalist. This is done to underline the idea that that patriarchy, in its new avatar under the capitalist setup, has become more destructive than ever. So I found that this paradigm, this idea of capitalist patriarchy, is a powerful one, because it helps us better comprehend and encapsulate the present predicament of women in general and Adivasi women, or the women in the margins in particular, who face the dual victimization of both the patriarchal handicaps and the capitalist exploitation of environment. So this is the second conceptual framework that I borrow from ecofeminism. The third paradigm, the third analytical tool, I borrow from Vandana Shiva. She's an eminent ecofeminist scholar from India. Vandana Shiva, she brings forth a very perceptive analysis of the connection between capitalist-induced unsustainable economic systems and its interconnection with the increasing violence against women. What Vandana Shiva does, she tells us that the traditional patriarchy, when it gets hybridized with the capitalist patriarchy, then it intensifies gender violence against women. So I would also quote Vandana Shiva here. This is a very beautiful quote from her side. She says that violence against women has taken on new and more vicious forms, as traditional patriarchal structures have hybridized with the structures of capitalist patriarchy. We need to examine the connections between the violence of unjust, unsustainable economic systems and the growing frequency and brutality of violence against women. So this even this analytical framework was quite helpful in making sense of what the Adivasi and the Santal women are going through in the present times, the vulnerability and the insecurity to which they have been exposed. So with these three analytical frameworks that I borrow from ecofeminism, who kind of provide a context, a perspective to my presentation, to my paper today, I move on to the second part of my presentation. Here, in the second part, what I do is I first go a little into the history, the colonial history of environmental degradation in the region of Santal Parganas. First, I do a little an exposition of the colonial past of Santal Parganas, and I relate it to the environmental degradation, and then I come to the contemporary times, and I show how the contemporary period is increasingly destroying the nature, the natural resources of this region. And then I locate Santal women amidst this loss of livelihood and environmental degradation. So we all know that Adivasis are historically dispossessed and dislocated community. If we go through the oral literature of Adivasis, the Santals in particular, there are several songs and stories of wanderings, of getting uprooted and then settling down and then getting uprooted again. So that the land and the natural resources to which the Santals have been so intimately attached, they have always been coveted by the so-called mainstream since the ancient past. So that has made the Santals a wandering, historically a wandering community. Charulal Mukherjee very poignantly notes this wandering past of Santals. I quote him, with a characteristic naivete, the Santals say that like the caterpillars, they are advancing, grazing and eating, but still they have not yet been extinguished from the face of the earth. They do not know where they will go next. Some have crossed the Ganges. It is not known why the Thakur, the creator, is punishing them in this way. So Charulal Mukherjee makes a very poignant note of their wandering past. So these Santals, after a long protracted past of getting uprooted, of wanderings, they finally settle down in their homeland, which they call is their homeland. It is the Santal Parganas. They settle down here, and after settling down in Santal Parganas, they are exposed to the colonial ploy of expropriation of their labor as well as resources. So this begins in the early 19th century, and with the passage of the Forest Act of 1865, the exploitation becomes legal. There is this exploitation, but it is done in the name of conservation and preservation of forests. It is done very legally, and the age-old association of the Santals with their environment is constantly being torn apart. They are being deprived of their association with the nature. In the case of Santal Parganas specifically, in the year 1876, a forest tract measuring 36 square miles in the Damineko region of Santal Parganas, it was declared a reserved forest. And after 1876, several acts and forest rules were passed, and they were constantly alienating the Santals from the forests. The prime motive behind these rules and acts was never conservation and preservation of forests and the nature. They were meant to serve the colonial interests. There is a very beautiful paper by Atta Malik, and the scholar tries to draw a linkage between the various forest rules, forest acts in the region of Santal Parganas. He links it with the need of wood for railways. And we all know that we all know how what powerful role the railways has played in deepening the colonial exploitation of India. So all this was done in the name of preservation, but its main aim was to serve the colonial interest. Now, moving on to the contemporary times, we see that the process of capitalist exploitation the natural resources and the environment of the region of Santhal Parganas, it continues under the same garb of the protection of the environment. It continues with increasing intensity, with an accelerated pace, and it continues with greater artifice than the colonial powers. And the loss, unfortunately, has been tremendous and irreparable. I quote a data from a study from 2017. It claims that between 1935 and 2015, Jharkhand has lost roughly 53% of its forest cover. So in a gap of some 80 years, we people of Jharkhand, we have lost more than 50% of our forest cover. And when one comes to Santhal Parganas, the loss of forest cover is predominantly linked to stone quarrying and mining activities, because the hilly slopes of Santhal Parganas, they provide lucrative opportunities for mining. So with a very intensified pace of these activities, which is wreaking environmental hazard in this region, we find that the Adivasi, especially the Adivasi women, they are completely helpless and unprotected. We have two studies, one by Hasrat Arjumand and another by Nitya Rao. Both the studies belong to the year of 2005, and both the studies, they point towards the illegality of these stone quarrying and quarrying and mining activities. And I would quote Arjuman's account, which is an eye-opener. To quote him, field observations reveal that in the process of granting leases for mining on tribals' land, the local state has utterly flouted and violated the statutory provisions available at international, national, and state level. The deputy commissioners of Dumka and elsewhere in Santhal Parganas, instead of protecting the tribal land rights, have themselves violated the strict legal provisions under Section 20 of Santhal Pargana Tenancy Act 1949. So what we find is that despite the irregularities, the illegal irregularities, the quarrying continues, and it continues mostly because the quarrying, the mining brings lots of revenue to the government. It's a lucrative source of revenue for the government. Nitya Rao's study, which she tells us that for the year 2002-3, the total revenue that was earned by government from Dumka, it was 2 crores. So it was some 20 years back. So we can imagine the amount of revenue that would have increased in the last 20 years. So these quarrying activities, they continue despite the obvious, very palpable environmental destruction of the region, despite the health hazards that they have created, and despite the protests by Santals and the locals of this region. In April this year, the Santals of Sahibganj, they had blocked the roads in protest against illegal mining. And there were some respondents from the news who tell us, I'll quote their statements, and that those statements would give us a glimpse of what they are undergoing, the locals and the Santals of the region, how they are dealing with this environmental pollution and regeneration. Ravi Tudu, I quote Ravi Tudu, he complains that, quote, "The deafening noise from the blast makes it difficult for us to live here. The area is often covered in a blanket of dust." Then we have Maya Tudu. She remarks, quote, "We often find layers of dust on our drinking water and food. our crops are getting damaged and hardly any trees bear fruits these days. So it is not only the pollution or the health hazard or the environmental degradation or degeneration that is, they are not the only cause of concern. There is a serious, very vital loss of livelihood as well, to which I come now. These mining sites, they were established after a substantial loss of the forest cover, illegal felling of the trees, and these mining sites, because of them, the grazing ground is also getting lost. In one of the villages that was studied by Hasrat Arjuman, he tells us that before the introduction of stone quarrying, the tribals of the village, they used to rear some 40 to 45 cows per family. But after the introduction of the quarrying and mining activities, this has drastically reduced to 10 cows per family. Then what the mine owners do, they throw the mud dug out from the mines to the common grazing ground, which renders the grazing ground completely unusable and damaged. Even the agricultural productivity of the nearby regions, even that is in danger, because during the rains, the mine debris gets carried to the agricultural land, and they damage the fertile topsoil. Then there are grave losses to the groundwater as well. I quote Arjuman. He tells us, quote, "Uninterrupted oozing in and pumping out of water from the pit makes the groundwater level fall in the harvesting structures like wells. The explosions in the quarrying process have also harmed the open wells." So there is stone quarrying, mining, and loss of forest cover, loss of livelihood, and we have this entire activity of illegal felling of trees. It continues. There was this news, I would like to mention the news just last year. During the COVID pandemic, there was this report by a special branch of Jharkhand Police that highlights that during the COVID-induced lockdown, thousands of trees of Jharkhand were illegally cut down. And out of the 8 districts that was studied in the report, 3 districts belong to the region of Santal Parganas. They are Dumka, Jamtara, and Godda. And the environmental woes of this region do not end here. There are several projects, corporate projects in the pipeline. For example, the Adani power plant, the Jindal power plant, and right before the implementation of these projects, they are under serious charges of flouting the land acquisition acts, the provisions of land acquisition acts, the fair compensation rules, and the entire law related to environmental clearance. And the Santals and the locals have been vehemently opposing these projects. The Adani power plant, which is supposed to be installed in the region of Godda, it is supposed to provide, to cater to the power needs of Bangladesh, and it is being installed in Godda. Even the installation and establishment of the power plant, that will lead to large-scale displacement, that is very obvious, and those displacements and land acquisition would be done with after flouting several rules and acts. That is quite obvious. But what I want to point out here is for the installation of the 120-kilometer transmission line to transport the power to Bangladesh, that transmission line will cut through the forest land of the region. Then similarly, the proposed power plant in Godda, the Jindal power plant, it will utilize the coal from the Jitpur mines and water from Sundar Dam. And the locals, the Santals of this region, they tell us that when the Sundar Dam was being built, they had been displaced once before, so they are exposed to dangers of displacement again. So whatever we have discussed till now, I argue that this is a mere glimpse of the environmental injury that has been inflicted to this region, because sadly we lack comprehensive studies on this subject of environmental degradation for Jharkhand in general and Santhal Parganas in particular. The studies that I mentioned by Hasrat Arjumand and Nitya Rao, they are some 20-year old study, and these studies were undertaken when the destructive forces had only begun to make inroads into this region. So in the long gap of 20 years, when we have no study, as far as I know, if any of you know of some study, I tried to find out. I couldn't catch hold of any comprehensive study on environmental degradation in the region of Santal Parganas. So since we lack studies, so we don't have any idea how much this region has suffered since the colonial period. And we can't imagine the extent of loss that this region has undergone in the name of development and mainstreaming. So this environmental degeneration, the ecological imbalance in the name of capitalist-induced development, it has torn apart the community life of the people of this region, the Santals, and it has also harmed the symbiotic relationship that these Santals shared with the nature. And this symbiotic relationship with the nature, it guaranteed a self-sufficient, a contented livelihood to these people. So what happens to the Santal women when there is so much destruction? So we'll see how the Santal woman is located amidst this destruction, and we find that she emerges as the most disadvantaged. We are aware of the intimate relationship that Adivasi women, the Santal women, the relationship that they share with the nature, the forest space, the grazing grounds, the water bodies. They share a very close relationship with the environment. And I remember Nitisha also mentioning this in her presentation yesterday, that the entire 365 days and the 24 hours of Adivasi women, they are spent in a close association with her environment, with the nature. Although men also engage in collection of forest resources, we know that Santal men and the Adivasi men, they also share a very close relationship with the nature, but it is generally agreed that the women, they spend a greater amount of their daily lives in different activities related to the forest space. Collection of firewood, collection of leaves for plate making, fruits, herbs, medicines, collection of vegetables. These all activities belong largely to Santal women. And these activities, apart from meeting the daily household needs of the family, these tasks come with an added advantage. They are a source of income for the Santal women, because they, by selling the plates, the fruits, the herbs, the firewood in the market, they can claim an income that is rightfully hers. That is like rightfully theirs. I mean, the Santal women, it belongs rightfully to the Santal women, and we know that Santal women, they are deprived of property rights from their the customary law do not provide them with property rights. There are few exceptions. I'll deal with this particular subject, this particular aspect in the third part of my paper. So what I want to argue is that this loss of forest space, the shrinking forest space, etc., it is a blow to her income, also to the income of the Santal women. And with the shrinking of forest space, with the falling of the groundwater level, with the shrinking of water bodies, the daily tasks of the Adivasi women, the Santal women, it has become more arduous. She has to spend longer hours to go to the forest because the forest space is shrinking. She has to walk longer hours, spend longer hours to collect water, because the water bodies, they are drying up. The groundwater level has fallen. And we also know that the forest economy, the forest space, is a supplement to the income from agriculture for Adivasi communities, for the Santals. So when the forest space is under danger, when the livelihood that the income that supplemented their livelihood, the income from the forest, when this is in danger, when this is shrinking, then migration is the only option that is left for the Santal society. Migration in search of jobs, migration for daily wage, and migration in search of daily wage has become almost a norm for Santhal society. There is this 1987 study. This is some 35 years back by Narayan Banerjee, and he tells us that seasonal migration has become a traditional practice among the Santhals. So this is some 35 years back. So one can imagine what would have happened in this long gap of 35 years. And we find that the Santal women, they are increasingly migrating to faraway places in search for jobs. They are not migrating, like they're migrating to the nearby towns, they're migrating to the nearby states, but they are now migrating to faraway places in South India, in Karnataka, in Kerala. And this is something which is quite new, a new practice among the Santals, their migration to such faraway places. And recently, when due to COVID, when the migrant laborers, the long footwork of the migrant laborers from different parts of India that jolted the middle class out of their complacency. The focus was also brought on Adivasi women who are migrating to faraway lands in search for jobs. And this is substantially constituted by Santal women as well. And there were a few harrowing tales of Santal women from Dumka who were trapped in Karnataka and as bonded laborers, and then they were rescued and brought back by a fellow Santal men. And I read about another news where this Santal woman, she was a wage laborer in Madhya Pradesh, and she was walking down to reach her village, and during the daytime, she used to walk, and in order to keep herself safe from sexual violence, during the night she used to climb the trees and take a nap in the trees. So these are some very painful and unfortunate tales associated with the lives of Santal women who have to travel to faraway places in search for livelihood. And as this livelihood crisis deepens, and there is a desperate search for wage work, the Santal women are increasingly falling into the trafficking traps. And we know how trafficking amongst Adivasi women, how it's such a grave concern for all of us, and how it is kind of disintegrating the entire fabric of Santal society. So this is about the migration of Santal women. What happens when the men are migrating? Even the lives of the Santal men has disintegrated and dislocated. So even Santal men are migrating because the self-sufficient, the contented livelihood that was always there with the agriculture and the forest, subserving their needs. So even the Santal men are affected, and they are also migrating in search for jobs. But this migration by Santal men, even that is weighing doubly on Santal women. And this is very interesting study by Nitya Rao. I quote Nitya Rao here, which kind of encapsulates the impact on Santal women. She observes, quote, male migration actually enhances both the physical and financial burdens on the women in terms of overwork, leading to poor health and indebtedness. The need to run the household on a daily basis till such time as the cash remittance, usually inadequate, arrives, as also cope with the children and family relationships, also enhances emotional stress and tensions. So we have these Santal women who are struggling with ecological degeneration and loss of livelihood, but their hardships do not end here. We are still not getting the complete picture. The fuller picture is still there to be explored. The Santal women, they, apart from this dislocation, this disintegration caused by the environmental degradation and development activities, apart from this, the Santal women has to deal with the traditional patriarchy and the capitalist patriarchy. And we'll try to locate the Santal women in the crossroads of these two forms of patriarchy in the third section of my paper, to which we turn now. I'll just get a sip of water. This section will provide a brief overview of the traditional patriarchal setup of Santal society, and then you will see how the capitalist patriarchy, when it gets hybridized with traditional patriarchy, how it leaves the Santal women completely unprotected, uncared for. So first, moving on to the traditional patriarchal setup, Santal society is patrilineal, patrilocal, and patriarchal. And we will look at few indicators that highlight the patriarchal setup of the traditional Santal society. We will begin with the taboos, the asymmetrical taboos that are meant only for Santal women. I quote Kelkar and Devanathan. They argue that the asymmetric nature of taboos, for there are no corresponding taboos for men, shows that they are meant to establish an unequal ordering, a definite hierarchy in the family. So Santals also have certain asymmetrical taboos, the women-only taboos. And I mentioned two very specific, very vital taboos for women. One is, all of you must be familiar, the flow taboo. The women, the Santal women, they are not allowed to touch the floor. And there is another against climbing and thatching of roofs. Nitisha was mentioning yesterday these taboos, and these taboos are uncompromisingly stringent. I mean, the women, they cannot violate these taboos. And these taboos, as you can see, they are placed on crucial survival practices, and they kind of ensure the complete dependence of Santal women on the men of a community. And it also uh, serves as an effective mode to control women. We'll come to these taboos a little in a little detail later. Then there are prohibitions against in the religious sphere for the Santal women. They virtually they have no place in the religious life of the Santals, and this again is a prohibition that is all encompassing and uncompromising. Now let's come to the property rights. The Santal woman, she cannot claim either the parental property or the spousal property. So as a daughter, as a wife, as a mother, she is deprived of any property rights. There are a couple of exceptions though. For example, if a daughter is married in a gharjawai form of marriage, then the gharjawai or the adopted son-in-law, in the name, not in the name of the son-in-law, but due to the coming of the gharjawai, the daughter can become an heir to the property. She becomes the she becomes a legal heir of the property. But the gharjawai marriage has to have the consent of the village. So this is one area where a woman can claim property. Then even Santal widows, they have certain limited property rights as per the customary law. And for example, she can reside in, get maintenance, manage and control the land of the deceased husband. But these rights, they come with certain riders, certain conditions, that she's not childless, she stays in the village, and she does not remarry. And again, these rights of the Santal women, they are also conditional upon the sons becoming adult, when the usufructuary rights can be reduced to just maintenance for sustenance. So these are the rights of the Santal, widow Santal who has been widowed. A divorced Santal woman, she has no property rights, no right to maintenance from her husband, and theoretically the children also belong to the husband. As per the customary law, the Santal men, they can marry as much time they desire. But practically, we find some Santal men marrying twice, having two wives. And even in the arena of witchcraft, we find that only the Santal women are witches, and the witch finders are always men. So this is also another feature that mirrors the gender discriminatory nature of Santal social structures. What about the political space of the Santals? the Maji Parganate system. This patriarchal structure, the customary patriarchal structure of the Santals, it shapes the political space as well. And we find that the Gram Sabha or the More Hor, it is all male in composition, and it's all male in deliberation as well. I mean, the official functionary of the Modehor, the Gram Sabha, the village assembly, they are always male, except for few exceptions. And then even in the deliberations of the village assembly, largely the women do not participate in the village assembly process. There is a near total absence of women in the village assembly meetings, but there are no customary rules prohibiting their attendance in the village assembly. But practically, their participation in the village assembly is strongly discouraged. So till now we have tried to portray the traditional constitution, the patriarchal constitution of Santhal society, and the everyday experiences, the everyday life of Santhal women, they get defined by this setup. But the Santhal women, they are grappling with twin exploitative structures, the traditional patriarchy as well as the capitalist patriarchy. And to use the ecofeminist paradigm that I borrow from Vandana Shiva, that when the traditional patriarchy, it gets hybridized with capitalist patriarchy, the patriarchy in the new form, then it poses insurmountable challenges for the Santhal women. It makes her life more vulnerable, more dislocated. So, what are these challenges that comes with the hybridization of both forms of patriarchy? I'll focus on two. One, firstly, the increasing violence against Santhal women from within her own society. And secondly, on the shrinking space for her already limited customary rights. So these are the two areas that I'll focus that has emerged as new challenges for Santhal women. Moving on to the increasing violence part, we know that Santals are essentially a peace-loving community, a peace-loving people, very amiable. But in the past few decades, one witnesses growing cases of violence against Santal women from her own men, from the men of her own society. How do we explain this disjuncture? There is a general belief that Santals are very peace-loving, and then on the other side we have men getting increasingly violence against her women. So before going to the explanation of this disjuncture, let's look at few instances of violence that will make the picture more clear. I quote from a Hindi magazine. Please listen to the quote very carefully, and then we'll come to from where this quote comes from, etc. 25-30 साल की एक संथाल औरत, लोग रस्सी से उसे बांधकर जानवर की तरह घसीटते हुए बाहर ले जा रहे हैं. वह तड़पती है, लोग बगल, पीठ और पैर पर छड़ी से मारते हैं. वह चीखती है, लोग उसे हूरते हैं और छड़ी तथा लातों से मारते हैं. वह गिर पड़ती है, लोग उसे घसीटते हुए खेत में ले जाते हैं और बैल के साथ उसे जोतकर हल जोतने लगते हैं. 1 फेरा, 2 फेरा, ठीक 2.5 फेरे पर हाँफती हुई मुंह से फेन उगलकर वह गिर पड़ती है और फिर उसे घसीट कर लोग गांव लाते हैं. नाद के पास बैल की तरह उसे खूंटे से बांध देते हैं. उसके आगे जानवरों के खाने वाला भूसा, खल्ली और बिचाली की कुट्टी, धोवन पानी के साथ परोस दी जाती है. लोग जानवर की तरह खाने के लिए उसे पीटते हैं, विवश जानवर की तरह जान बचाने के लिए वह मुंह लगाकर खाती है। जब पानी के लिए गिड़गिड़ाती है, जार बेजार रोती खांसती है, तब बगल की नाद में 3 दिनों से सड़ती जूठन सानी का पानी लाकर उसे पिलाया जाता है। This extract, it is not from an imaginary story. This is something that happened in actual in reality, and this I quoted from a newspaper called Aaj, and this is related to an incident that happened on 22nd July 1998 at Bagjori village in Jamtada, where the wife of Avilas Hembram, she started plowing the field because her husband was unwilling to do that. And in spite of all her pleadings, this woman, she starts plowing the field, and the village decides to punish her, and this is what they do to her that I just read. Similarly, there are, this is one instance that I quoted about how the Santal society has started reacting actually when the traditional taboos are violated by Santal women. Then similarly, the sexual violence against Santal women by men of their own community is also on the rise. Traditionally, we know that rape and sexual assault, they have been rare occurrences in Santal society. But the past decades have witnessed a rise in such incidents, and they come with an added dimension these days. There has been a rise in sexual violence and rape of Santal women by the Santal men themselves, but there is an added dimension, and that dimension is to punish the erring Santal woman, the woman who has done something wrong. And what wrong she has done, what erring here means, it means having relationship with a non-Santal man. The 2014 gang rape in Birbhum and the 2017 very unfortunate gang rape just quite near to the place where I stay in Dumka. This is 2017 gang rape that happened in the Dighi region of Dumka. These are all unfortunate reminders of this new dimension that has crept into Santal society in recent few decades. Likewise, the incidence of killing and lynching in the name of witchcraft that continues, although it has reduced statistically. In 2018, Jharkhand saw the highest number of witch killings in the country, according to the annual figures released by National Crime Records Bureau. So, in the new capitalist patriarchal regime, when the traditional patriarchy and the capitalist patriarchy have hybridized, the Santhal women have been exposed to increasing violence by its own men. And here I'm not adding the violence that the Santhal women are exposed to by the non-Santhal, by the non-tribal people, which are disproportionately large. I'm just confining myself to the violence by her own society. Moving on to the increasing attacks on her already limited rights by the Santal men, we find that the recent research tells us that the Ghar Jawai form of marriage, we just discussed the Ghar Jawai form of marriage, where when a daughter is married in a Ghar Jawai form, when the son-in-law is an adopted son, then the woman, the girl, can become an heir to the property. This is the Ghar Jawai form of marriage. We find that in the recent couple of decades, the Ghar Jawai form of marriage has become a rare occurrence. and even when they are undertaken, they are the community, the village community is extremely unwilling to give its consent. So the Gharjawai form of marriages have become rare. Then the Santal widows, the limited rights that of maintenance that they had as widows, even there are instances of Santal widows getting evicted by their own son. So even their rights that they claimed customarily as widow of her husband, even that is not for her these days. And the taboos that we just talked about, the floor taboo and the taboo against thatching and climbing of roof, even they are being used to evict single women from their land, from the property. I met the Santhal woman who narrated her story of her mother, who was a widow, and she had only sisters. This lady has only sisters, and her widowed mother, in spite of all her pleadings, nobody used to come to plow the land, and they nobody came to repair the leaking roofs, and for many months during the rainy season they had to stay under leaking roofs. And why the men of the neighborhood, their own the relatives, why they were not coming to lend a hand? Because they wanted to compel the widowed mother to leave the land with her daughter, so that they can catch hold of that land. So we find that apart from the increasing violence, there is an increasing hostility against the claims of Santal women that we see in the new times, when capitalist patriarchy and traditional patriarchy have integrated and made matters worse for Santal women. What are these village institutions doing? What is the Gram Sabha, the Mode Corps doing? How is the Santal woman negotiating with this village institution? We find that in the recent decades, even the village justice system, it has become largely ineffectual. I had done one study on the Santals, on the Santal traditional institutions, and I found out that the deference that was once commanded by the community institutions, that these village institutions, the deference that it once commanded from its own community, that has weakened a lot in the recent few decades. So the very institution that have historically protected the already limited rights of the Santal women, that have historically provided a negotiating space for the Santal women, that has heard to the woes of Santal women, although it was quite limited, but even that negotiating space has it's not available for the Santal women now, because the traditional village institutions have become largely unresponsive, largely ineffectual, indecisive. So I argue that at present, uh, how do we explain this hostility against the claims of women? How do we explain the growing unresponsiveness of the village institutions? I argue that the growing unresponsiveness and the ineffectuality of traditional Santal institutions, and the increasing attacks on the claims of or the limited women's rights, they have to be seen in the broader context of the dislocation and the disintegration that has been caused due to environmental degradation, that has been caused due to capitalist-induced developmental activities, that has been caused due to mainstreaming. There are the two connected factors. The capitalist forces are entering the Santal society. The market is entering the Santal society. The mainstream legal institutions, the state administration is gradually making deeper and deeper inroads into Santal society. And we know that the state and the legal system, they also most of the time they facilitate the inroads of corporates and the capitalist entities. So these are all very interconnected, and all these factors, they have disintegrated the traditional economic system of Santal society. The community life has dislocated, and this has created a a sense of heightened insecurity, a sense of loss, and the challenges and hostility to the rights of women, to the claims of women, needs to be seen in this broader context of deepening crisis. Even the growing violence against women, they should be seen. They should be seen in this dislocation. And I would quote Felix Pedel, the eminent anthropologist, and his quote, his statement, it gives us a sense of why the Santal men have become hostile to its own women. Felix Pedel, he observes that, I quote him, when a society is under attack, it begins to attack itself, takes it out on its own women. This is what Felix Pedel says. So, as ecofeminist framework, as ecofeminist philosophy inspires us, or it guides us to form interconnections. So in this discussion, if we try to form connections between different factors, we find that the capitalist activities, the developmental activities, they are interconnected to the environmental degradation. This environmental degradation leads to loss of livelihood. The loss of livelihood leads to disintegration of traditional economic and community life. And then this is connected to the increasing violence and vulnerability of Santal women. So this is how I use ecofeminist tools to look at Santal society, to the framework, the broader framework that I borrow from ecofeminism, and kind of gender the Santal society. The ecofeminist tools, the conceptual tools of capitalist patriarchy, or the idea of the interplay between environmental degradation and women's oppression. These paradigms, they help us make a better sense of what is happening to the life of Adivasi women. And the discussion that we just had, they confirm and uphold the ecofeminist claim that environmentalism is a feminist issue. That said, after using ecofeminist lens to study the Santals, after applying a number of analytical frameworks from ecofeminist philosophy and using it in my study, that said, I also argue that there are certain gray areas in ecofeminism as a philosophy, and these gray areas, these inadequacies, if I can use that term, these tend to stand out when we study tribal societies. When I studied Santal society, I could identify these areas where I propose that the theory of ecofeminism, the philosophy of ecofeminism, I think they need to be these gray areas needs to be reconsidered. And I'll conclude by identifying these gray areas in ecofeminism, and I'll leave few questions. Firstly, as already mentioned, ecofeminism sees an intimate linkage between environmental degradation and patriarchy. In other words, it links anthropocentrism and androcentrism. But how do we apply this interconnection? How do we apply this linkage when we try to evaluate a tribal society which is historically tuned towards environmentally sustainable economies and which is at the same time patriarchal? To make it more simple, we know that Adivasi societies, the tribal societies, and just discuss Santal society, Adivasi societies are known for environmentally sustainable economic practices, which is celebrated by ecofeminism. But Adivasi societies are also patriarchal. So how does the linkage that ecofeminism tries to form between patriarchy and environmental degradation, how does that linkage work in tribal society? This is one question that I tried to pose. One may argue that tribal society is not as patriarchal as non-tribal societies, but that does not write off patriarchy from Adivasi societies and tribal societies. So how do we work out that linkage that ecofeminism puts forward? I wish to pose this question at a broader level, and I also wish to historicize this particular question, moving beyond the tribal society. We know that patriarchy as a system, it is older than the rise of various civilizations. There are numerous debates about creation of patriarchy, when patriarchy actually came, but it is generally agreed. For example, Gerda Lerner, she tells us that patriarchy, when she talks about the history of patriarchy, the coming of patriarchy, she locates it during the times when the human society was undergoing the tribal stage of pastoralism. During the lineage stage, she locates the creation of patriarchy in those times. If we look at Frederick Engels, he locates the establishment of patriarchy with the coming of private property, and that is linked to the coming of agriculture. So I argue that when even before the rise of various civilizations, the patriarchy had been created, it was already there. And in those ancient days, the human societies are known to have practiced sustainable economic means of livelihood. In other words, patriarchy predates environmental degradation by many centuries. So although there is a strong case of making interconnections between the rape of earth and the rape of women, as the ecofeminists argue, we can make a strong linkage. There is a strong case if we draw that linkage in the present times of environmental degradation. But when we try to look at those linkages in tribal society or in the self-sufficient village economies of the past, even the pre-colonial past, such linkages seem untenable. So how do we go about it? I argue that the ecofeminists, they stop at patriarchy, and they project patriarchy as the prime agency that causes environmental degradation and the prime agency that leads to women's oppression. I argue that we need to go beyond patriarchy. We need to go into the material roots of patriarchy and the material roots of environmental degradation as well. And instead of stopping at patriarchy, let's explore a little deeper. This is what I argue. And the third very short question, how do we reconcile the nature worshipping character of Adivasi societies or the Santal society? I limit myself to Santal society because I've studied Santal society. I haven't studied other Adivasi societies much. How do we reconcile the nature worshipping character of Santal society, which is celebrated by ecofeminists? The nature worshipping character of Adivasi societies is celebrated by ecofeminists. But how do we reconcile this character with the uncompromising religious prohibition for Santal women? Have a nature worshipping Santal society, but at the same time, the nature worshipping arena of Santal society is closed for women. So how do we reconcile these two if we use ecofeminist perspective, if we use ecofeminist framework to analyze Santal society? So I leave with these three questions and I conclude, and I hope I get insights, inputs from the listeners, the participants, and I welcome all comments and questions. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for articulating with such vividness the issues of Santal women, whether it be in their lives, whether it is in relation to the environment that they are living in, the impact of capitalist ideologies on their life, using the ecofeminist tools. Thank you so much. I would now invite our participants to ask questions. One of the questions were asked almost during the beginning of your the talk. I would request Ms. Indu Kumari to please unmute herself and start her video and ask the question herself.
I'm sorry, I think my data is not sufficient enough to enable my video, but I'll still try doing it. Am I audible enough?
Yes, yes, you're audible enough. You can ask your question.
So ma'am, my question basically pertains to what the reference that you made to the work of Charulal Mukherjee's, and the quotation that you used in your presentation while you were presenting. There was this analogy which was made where Santals were actually referred to, or it was as if they were referred to as caterpillars. So he, coming from a very privileged section of the society, he being a research scholar, plus I would straight away put this, that he coming from upper caste section. Such an analogy, I think, is kind of problematic. Also, it's weird for me because, as again, if you remember from the last section, that yesterday's session, that what we draw from Nitisha ji's conversation, that there she mentioned that tribals are generally associated with monsters, devils, and these days you see them being associated also, especially women being associated with witchcraft. So I feel that how do you settle with that kind of association that Charulal Mukherjee made to caterpillars when referring to these Santhal, this particular tribe? This is what my question was. And also, should I also add my second question to it?
Yes, sure.
Let her first answer the first question.
Okay.
Indu, I think we should go back to the book written by Charulal Mukherjee. Probably I didn't make it clear. He is actually encapsulating what the Santals themselves are speaking about their past. It's not his own words. It is something that he has gathered from the oral accounts of the Santals. So it is the Santals themselves who are telling us that they have been like caterpillars grazing, and in that sense they are trying to, project themselves as a community who have been uprooted a number of times. So this is not these are not the words of Charulal Mukherjee. These are words that have been gathered from the oral accounts of Santals. So I don't think the charges against Charulal Mukherjee stand in that sense.
And just adding to that, can you just refer to which book exactly did he refer to when he was mentioning this?
This book is titled as The Santals by Charulal Mukherjee. I think it was published in 1962 or something. Okay. So you can just refer to that book, and I'll ask Anjana and to give my email ID so that we can discuss it more.
Okay. Should I put forth my next question? Okay. So the second question, ma'am, is if, because you were also referring to the migration that was happening during the pandemic. So you talked about how the population, the Santhal population, is especially women, how they were migrating and how things happened to them, how male population, when they were migrating, how it helped the Santhal women in certain fashion. I just wanted to know if your study is also looking into the other tribes migrating during that period as well, because see, this pandemic has also pushed us into thinking what and how things happened during that time. So if you are locating your study and restricting yourself to just only Santals as one tribal population, I think we are leaving out other tribes who are also kind of adding to what the pandemic did to them. So I just wanted to know if your study is actually is a kind of figuring somehow how these other tribes of especially Jharkhand were affected during the pandemic, and how they, because I know that a lot of tea plantation workers at that point of time were also migrating. So if you are aware of any such other information regarding other tribes also migrating, and how their lifestyle, their livelihood, their associations changed during the pandemic.
See, Indu, as a researcher, I'm still a research scholar. I haven't completed my PhD. So please don't call me ma'am. I'm still a research scholar. And as researcher, we know that we have to keep ourselves specific to the topic where we are researching. And in order to broaden the context, the perspective of the study, we also need to look at other communities, other related areas. So I've been looking into other tribal communities as well. But unfortunately, the migration part, unfortunately, the research on women particularly, and since I'm from history, from a historical perspective, these studies are lacking a lot, and I'm still in search of many more studies on migration and particularly of Santal women. And I hope I get more on tribal women from other areas also.
Thank you, ma'am. I would now request Mr. Valentine Sinduraji to please unmute himself and ask the question. If anybody else wants to ask the question, they could please raise their hands, and I would unmute and ask them to ask their questions. Yes, sir.
Thank you, ma'am, for elaborating and elaborative and informative this one discussion and sharing about the knowledge. So one question I have always, the question I have this, that sometimes we do not understand that Adivasis have actually parted with a lot of acres land, thousands of or millions of acres lands for the development of the country in the name of that. But today, the mainstream society actually thinks, and the government also thinks, that these Adivasis are anti-development. They eat things like that. So in that sense, whatever the this one projects comes, for development projects will come, this Adivasis will oppose that one, because they have the past before this one, before the independence or after the independence. After the independence, the Adivasis have one thing, that they are listed in scheduled tribe. They have land rules like CNT, SPT Acts that will help us. Government will help them, but government has not helped them, and it has actually opposed them. They have government has uprooted them with the help of the this one, with the corporate of the capitalists. So what is the role of the academia today? What is the role of mainstream society today? What is the role of Adivasis to address such situation and such crisis, such problems? This I want to know from you. Thank you.
Valentine, this is a very grand question, and there are no easy answers to such questions actually. As an academician, I feel that all of us, wherever we can, we should highlight those matters. As wherever we feel that is why I chose this area of study, because I stay here in Santal Parganas, and I am aware of what's happening to the society, and this is what I choose as an academician, to highlight the cracks in the society, the way the society is getting dislocated and disintegrated. So as academicians, this is what we can do, and we can also lend support to such people, such groups who are raising their voices against the injustice, against the dislocation that is being caused in the name of development. Development cannot be complete, it cannot be welcome, unless the stakeholders are also taken into account, unless the voice of the stakeholders, unless the people who are getting affected by those developmental activities, unless their voices is also incorporated, their choices also becoming a part of that developmental process and plan. Unless that happens, the discontentment, the hostility. We use the word hostility because there's a strong history behind this hostility. So that will continue. So we need to democratize the entire development process by incorporating the voice of the stakeholders.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you so much.
No, thank you.
You could unmute yourself, sir. Thank you, ma'am, for sharing your knowledge with us. And I think it has been so elaborative, expressive, and so lucidly explained. There are hardly any doubts left in the mind of the participants. And since we are live streaming it on YouTube also, I would like to tell you that all the resource persons for the 6 days have joined us and have heard you and have appreciated the talk very much. And it has been a great learning experience for all of us. Thank you so much for your time and knowledge sharing.
Thank you so much.
I would now request, thank you. I would now request Dr. Anjana Singh to present a summary of the talk for today and also present the vote of thanks. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Shayantani. And with due permission from Amita, could you please allow me a word or a sentence or two to substantiate the queries made by Indu and for the sources you are also looking for? As an academician, I am always tempted and I barely am able to control myself on my chair and say, you know, I'm not going to interrupt in between the lecture.
No, sure. As I
That's a real difficult thing for me for the entire course of 1.5 hours. इंदु, आपका सवाल बड़ा अच्छा था, और आप लोग दोनों को, अगर आप और अमिता दोनों बडिंग रिसर्चर्स हैं, तो मैंने काफी पहले, मुझे पीएचडी किए हुए 10 साल हो गए हैं, तो मैं और कुछ लोग हमारे मेरे अंडर भी पीएचडी करते हैं, तो मैं कहीं ना कहीं वो एक आदत सी भी पड़ जाती है कि आप कहीं ना कहीं इंटरफेयर करें और आपको पता हो कि यहाँ 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 इंफॉर्मेशन है, तो मैं चाहती हूँ कि इस तरह के प्लेटफॉर्म पर उसे शेयर करूँ। तो क्षमा चाहते हुए, और आपकी इजाजत होगी तभी अमिता मैं इसमें कुछ बोलूंगी।
No, not at all. I just told that
Sure.
कि मैं भी
देखिए, बहुत सारे
research
स्टडीज किए गए हैं, बहुत सारे स्टडीज हुए हैं, और आप जेएनयू में से हैं अमिता, और इंदु आप जेएनयू में पीएचडी कर रही हैं, और वहां से एक जर्नल आता है स्टडीज इन हिस्ट्री, आप सबने उसका नाम सुना होगा, बहुत रिप्यूटेड जर्नल है, काफी अच्छा काम होता है। 1990 के दशक से वहां मार्क्सिस्ट स्कूल ऑफ इकोनॉमिक हिस्टोरियंस बहुत रूल करते रहे हैं, और अगर आप उनकी स्टडीज को पढ़ेंगे, जैसे कुलीज एंड कोलियर्स ऑफ असम, ये पीपी मोहपात्रा की स्टडी है, इन्होंने 3 सक्सेसिव उसके वॉल्यूम्स में लिखा है, आप इस स्टडी को देखिए, और ये माइग्रेशन पर 1990s में डेटा देता है कि कितना बड़ा माइग्रेशन हो रहा था कॉलोनियल पीरियड से 1990s। बहुत बड़ी स्टडी है, एग्जॉस्टिव स्टडी है, 3 बार में उनको पार्ट में उनको पब्लिश होने का मौका मिला है, एंड वेरी गुड वन। एक जहां तक उसका अमिता का एक प्रोपोजिशन था कि आदिवासी सोसाइटी पेट्रियार्कल है और इकोफेमिनिज्म के लिए आप कुछ सवाल छोड़ रही हैं, तो मैं पहले सवाल पर आऊं। एक एंथ्रोपोलॉजिस्ट हैं, एंड आई होप आपने उनका नाम सुना हो, उनका नाम है सुरजीत सिन्हा। अब सुरजीत सिन्हा ने एज एन एंथ्रोपोलॉजिस्ट बहुत ज्यादा ट्राइब्स पर काम किया है, खासकर वो जो बंगाल और झारखंड के बॉर्डर्स पे रहते हैं, जिन्हें तब बिहार कहा जाता था जब वो जीवित थे और काम कर रहे थे। अगर आप सुरजीत सिन्हा के एंथ्रोपोलॉजिकल स्टडीज को पढ़िएगा, तो आपके बहुत सारे क्वेरीज, आपके बहुत सारे प्रपोजिशंस का आंसर आपको वहां से निकलता हुआ दिख जाएगा। सो दैट इज वन आई विल से रिगार्डिंग द फॉरेस्ट रिसोर्सेज थिंग्स, और आप उसकी स्टडी की कितना डिलैपिडेशन हुआ है, उस पर कोई एग्जॉस्टिव स्टडी हुई है कि नहीं हुई है। एक बहुत अच्छी लॉयर कम राइटर हैं जो नेशनली इंटरनेशनली लिखती हैं, डेटा कलेक्शन करवाती हैं, एनजीओ भी चलता है, और मैं लकीली उनको ऐसे जानती हूँ कि मेरे साथ एक बुक प्रोजेक्ट में उन्होंने एक चैप्टर कंट्रीब्यूट किया था। इनका नाम है शमोना खन्ना, शी इज अ रांची बेस्ड लॉयर, और उनके एनजीओ ने मैसिव काम किया है, फॉरेस्ट डिलैपिडेशन पे स्टडीज कराई हैं, और उसका कंपाइलेशन है। इसके अलावा बिरसा है झारखंड का एक एनजीओ जो मेजरली इस तरह के डेटा को अक्वायर करता है, जिसके साथ में हमने आप स्ट्राइड के थ्रू प्रोफेसर रमेश कुमार शरण को बुलाया था, वो इस बिरसा के साथ काफी गहरे जुड़े हुए हैं, और उनकी स्टडीज भी हैं इस पर। तो आप इन सब चीजों को देख सकते हैं, and I'm sorry that I interfered it, sorry, but I had to, क्योंकि
Anjana, there are not many studies specifically on the region of Santal Parganas. As you saw that I was dealing only with Santal Parganas. So there are studies on Jharkhand, but there are a few studies on Santal Parganas.
When you started with Nathan and Kelkar and Nitya Rao, and then studies, and then you tried to frame it out, I could understand that in the things that you have come across, these are the things you have not come across. So there are things you have studied, and there are things that needs to be studied.
Yeah.
So as a researcher, if you are interested, I had a handful of information, but I have not entire information.
Yes,
Even
sure.
I also accept my limitations. I have just a handful of information, or the entire gamut of informations in front of me. And this is just for the interested participants that I wanted to tell you that studies are being carried out. Actually, Jharkhand is visualized in 2 broad perspectives, Chota Nagpur and Santhal Pargana.
Yes.
So those who are writing on Chota Nagpur would write on Chota Nagpur, and those who are writing on Santhal Pargana would write on Santhal Pargana, because there is a huge difference socially in the makeup, in the political framework. So when you look at these studies from the colonial period, there are too many studies that have also been conducted on Santhal Pargana, and we need to not let them go. We need to reproduce them. We need to study them. And do our own studies, taking some ideas from them,
Yes.
and reach to the ultimate truth. That is what I believe in. That was all from my part, but let me come to the summary part. मैं चूंकि आज अमिता ने संपूर्ण भाषण अंग्रेजी में दिया, तो मैं जो हिंदी भाषी प्रदेश के लोग हैं उनके सुविधा के लिए सारांश को हिंदी में कुछ शब्दों में प्रस्तुत करने का प्रयास करूंगी। वैसे बेहतर तरीके से आपने अमिता को सुना है। सिर्फ हिंदी में मैं इतनी बात कहना चाहूंगी कि आप में से बहुत सारे शोधार्थियों के कई सवाल मेरे पास आते हैं, और बहुत लोगों को ये दुख रहता है कि हम जहाँ रहते हैं वहाँ बहुत अच्छी पढ़ाई नहीं होती, वहाँ हमें मटेरियल नहीं मिलता, वहाँ शोध की गुंजाइश नहीं है। मैं अमिता के बारे में आपको बताऊं कि अमिता एक बेहद ग्राउंडेड बैकग्राउंड से निकली हैं और इनकी पृष्ठभूमि रही। इसके बाद उन्होंने दिल्ली JNU तक की यात्रा की, और वहां से नौकरी के यात्रा के दौरान वो आज दुमका में है कई साल से, और वहीं से ये जो बड़ी थियरीज पर बात कर रही हैं, ये छोटी थियरीज पर बात कर रही हैं, ये फील्ड वर्क पर बात कर रही हैं, ये सब उन सारे हैंडीकैप्स के बावजूद बात कर पा रही हैं जो आप सबके लिए बाधा बनते हैं। अभी हाल फिलहाल में अमिता के 2 आर्टिकल्स आए हैं, एक EPW से संथाल विमेन पर आया है और एक और सेज से आया है। अगर अमिता की इजाजत हो तो मैं चाहूंगी कि आप इनके वो दोनों आर्टिकल्स पढ़ें, और अगर आप इजाजत दें अमिता और हमारे साथ शेयर करें, तो मैं चाहूंगी कि मैं अपने स्कॉलर्स ग्रुप को वो दोनों आर्टिकल दूं। ये आज एक उभरता हुआ नाम है अमिता। मैं हमेशा कह रही हूँ कि कई उभरते नाम हैं जिनको हम सामने लाना चाह रहे हैं, हमारा ये प्रयास है। अमिता उनमें से एक नाम है। कई बार कोई रिसर्चर बाहर से आकर हफ्ते, महीने और 1 महीने रहकर किसी क्षेत्र को देखकर चला जाता है। हम और अमिता जैसे लोग, हम यहीं रहते हैं, हम यहीं काम करते हैं और यहीं से सारी थियरीज को पता करना चाहते हैं। तो आपने जो पहला सवाल था इंदु आपका कि नितिशा ने एक अलग तरीके से पोर्ट्रे किया, और अमिता जिन्हें कोट कर रही थी वो अलग तरह से पोर्ट्रे कर रहे हैं। तो इसको अंग्रेजी में एक वर्ड है इनसाइडर एंड आउटसाइडर्स व्यू। नितिशा वॉज एन इनसाइडर। नितिशा एक आदिवासी महिला थी, वो अंदर से भीतर से अपनी चीजों को लेकर गौरवान्वित हैं, उनके अंदर अपने आदिवासी होने का सम्मान है। और जो बाहर से आता है वो ये समझता है कि हम उनको एक स्पेस दे रहे हैं, वो हासिल नहीं कर रहे हैं। तो कई बार एक रीडिंग्स में आपको डुअलिटी इन्हीं कारणों से दिखाई देती है। एक जो समझता है कि हम बड़े लिबरल हैं और स्पेस दे रहे हैं, और एक वो जो समझता है कि हम भी बराबर के हकदार हैं और ये स्पेस तो मेरा था। तो ये इसीलिए इन दोनों तरह के वक्तव्यों में आप फर्क देखेंगे, जो अमिता की बातों में भी पूरी तरह से झलक कर बाहर आता है। आज के पूरे व्याख्यान को चंद शब्दों में इतना ही कहूंगी कि उन्होंने एक अच्छा व्याख्यान वो होता है जो हर तरह से संतुलित हो। अमिता ने इकोफेमिनिज्म का चश्मा लिया, पर उस चश्मे की से दिखने वाली हर बात को सही नहीं माना। उसने उस चश्मे पर भी एक बेहतर शोधार्थी जैसा, एक उत्सुक शोधार्थी जैसा, उन्होंने उस चश्मे पर भी सवाल किया कि चश्मे का लेंस शायद धुंधला है। तो आप भी जब किसी बड़ी विचारधारा के साथ छोटी चीजों को देखना शुरू करें या एक चीजों को समझाना शुरू करें, तो ये मत समझिए कि एक विचारधारा में कोई समस्या नहीं है, होती है। आप जितने दृष्टिकोण से देखेंगे उतनी समस्याएं दिखेंगी। इकोफेमिनिज्म सिर्फ एक लेंस है, एक चश्मा है, जिसके द्वारा आप उन चीजों को भी इन परतों में देखने की कोशिश करते हैं जो आपको नहीं दिखाई देती। लेकिन इकोफेमिनिज्म एक परफेक्ट चश्मा है। न तो इसका दावा इकोफेमिनिस्ट कर रहे हैं, न इसका दावा हम कर रहे हैं, और न इसका दावा शोधार्थी कर रहे हैं। हम कई और चश्मों से भी देख सकते हैं, सिर्फ ये एक चश्मा है जिसके द्वारा हम इसे देखने का प्रयास कर रहे हैं। अमिता ने अपनी बातों को बेहद खूबसूरती से रखा। उन्होंने सारी थियरीज आपको क्रम में, उन्होंने बहुत सारे ऑथर्स को कोट किया जिनके काम जो हैं आज बोलते हैं इस प्रदेश पे, चाहे वो नाथन एन केलकर की किताब हो या नित्या राव। सबसे ज्यादा मुझे लगता है मोस्ट कोटेड जो हैं वो नित्या राव ही हैं, जो संथाल परगना पर कोटेड होती हैं, टुगेदर विथ what was that name of other person, that
Hasrat
हसरत
Arjuman.
अर्जुमन, राइट, हसरत अर्जुमन, उनके साथ ये हैं जो काफी काम की हैं और इनको भी बहुत कोट किया जाता है। तो आप में से जो लोग जब किसी एक पर्टिकुलर क्षेत्र के आदिवासियों को पढ़ रहे हैं तो सिर्फ उन पर पुराना काम नहीं, नवीन काम भी देखिए। आप जब पढ़ते हैं तो अमिता कुमारी का भी काम पढ़िए जो ईपीडब्ल्यू में छपता है, जो सेज में छपता है, और हम सिर्फ कुछ चंद नामों के साथ उन स्टडीज को देखते हैं। ग्राउंड पर जाना और फिर वहां पर काम करना ये बेहद मुश्किल काम है, बहुत बहुत मेहनत लगती है उस डेटा को लाने में, उसको थियराइज करने में। और अमिता ने इतनी सरलता से ये सारा काम किया कि मैं हतप्रभ हूँ कि उन्होंने इतनी सरलता से इतनी सारी बातों को 1 घंटे के व्याख्यान में आपके सामने प्रस्तुत किया। सुमिता, आपके शानदार व्याख्यान के लिए आपको बहुत 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 धन्यवाद। और आप इसी तरह काम करते रहें, हमारी ये शुभकामनाएं होंगी, और हम आपका और भी काम देखना, पढ़ना और आपको सुनना चाहेंगे भविष्य में भी, इस मंच के द्वारा, अलग मंचों के द्वारा। मंच तो मंच है, पर व्यक्ति ज्यादा महत्वपूर्ण होता है। तो आज के संपूर्ण व्याख्यान सत्र में आप सब प्रतिभागियों को, सभी वक्ताओं को जिन्होंने बढ़ चढ़कर इसमें भाग लिया, अमिता को सुना और इस थियरी के बारे में बात करने की कोशिश की छोटे उदाहरणों से, हम आप सभी को धन्यवाद देते हैं कि आप इसमें शामिल हुए। अमिता को मैं धन्यवाद दे चुकी हूँ। धन्यवाद के पात्र हैं हमारे वो 2 संस्थान भी जिनके छत्र छाया में इस कार्यक्रम को आयोजित कर पाने का धैर्य या प्रयास हम कर लेते हैं। अमिटी यूनिवर्सिटी झारखंड और निर्मला महाविद्यालय रांची यूनिवर्सिटी झारखंड। हम उन लोगों के भी बहुत शुक्रगुजार हैं, खासकर निर्मला कॉलेज की छात्राएं और फैकल्टी मेंबर्स जो बड़ी संख्या में हमारे साथ हैं, चाहे वो रश्मि माला साहू हों, हेड ऑफ द डिपार्टमेंट पॉलिटिकल साइंस, देवजनी रॉय हों, ज्योति प्रसाद हों, तो हम उनका भी बहुत धन्यवाद करते हैं। एमिटी यूनिवर्सिटी झारखंड की भी फैकल्टी, मैं नाम से बहुत परिचित नहीं हूँ, लेकिन आप सबका भी बहुत धन्यवाद। साथ में उन सब प्रतिभागियों का धन्यवाद जो पूरे धैर्य के साथ इस व्याख्यान माला का हिस्सा बने हुए हैं। आप पढ़ते रहें, आप सीखते रहें, और हम सिर्फ मंच देते हैं, और ये डिस्कशन तो आपके और वक्ताओं के बीच का है। तो कृपया इस मंच का पूरा फायदा उठाएं। और आज के जो व्याख्यान है उसका सारांश पुनः आपको दे दिया जाएगा हिंदी अंग्रेजी में आपके ग्रुप पर, और हम उम्मीद करते हैं कि आप इसी प्रकार इस तरह के रिसर्च में, दुनिया तभी बदलेगी जब इस तरह के रिसर्च होंगे, सच जब तक हम बाहर लाएंगे, और इस तरह के छोटी छोटी चीजों से हम डिबेट करेंगे, डिस्कस करेंगे, बातें करेंगे, ये सब बेकार बातें नहीं होती, इनका बहुत दूरगामी प्रभाव पड़ता है, ये हमारी साइकी को बदलती है। सुनते रहिए, देखते रहिए, बहुत सारे काबिल लोग हैं, बहुत सारा काबिल काम है। पुनः आपको आपके इस खूबसूरत व्याख्यान के लिए धन्यवाद अमिता, और आज का सत्र इस धन्यवाद ज्ञापन के साथ हम यही समाप्त करना चाहेंगे। जोहार।